This is going to be a super short video on some of the stuff that we've been talking about in session, um, on the different ways that our ADHD brains struggle to start things, why that is, and what we can do to combat that and get things going and starting when we want to start them. The ADHD brain has a dysregulated amount of dopamine. So you can think about it as gasoline. Like in the same way that gasoline functions in a car, dopamine moves us forward, helps us do things, rewards us for finishing tasks, gives us the reward necessary to finish and continue tasks. And for our purposes today, it is essential for starting tasks. Um, and you can think about it like gasoline in a car. If you have dysregulated dopamine, that would mean that like you're driving your car and every once in a while you have too much gas and you go too fast, or impulsive, but most of the time you have too little dopamine and it's hard to start and it's certainly hard to do more difficult tasks. So one of the interesting pieces of this is that what I like to call the dopamine threshold. So our ability to start a task is kind of, you can think about it as our level of dopamine relative to our perceived difficulty of the task. So if we have more dopamine than we think we'll need to start the task, we can go ahead and do the task. But often what happens is our perception of the task is that it's going to be so difficult. It would be like a car going up a very steep hill with very little gas. That if the perception of the task is here and our dopamine level is here, there's no way we can climb this hill here. And so there's two ways to deal with that. The first is that we give ourselves more dopamine so that we can reach up here, or we can lower the difficulty of the task. So in the next few slides, I guess on the video, it will be little clips. We're gonna go through a couple strategies to do both things. The 15-5 method is a great way to begin a task because it allows you to build up dopamine levels and lower the perceived difficulty of the task at the same time. So what it consists of is setting it, so you have to use a timer for this, is setting a timer for 15 minutes and doing 15 minutes of something that you love, something that's totally for fun, that is not work related, it's just pure joy. So it could be watching TV, it could be playing guitar, anything that you just love to do, um, that will allow you to raise that dopamine level, that level of joy. So we want to raise the dopamine level high enough that when the timer goes off, when 15 minutes goes off, we commit to doing just 5 minutes of work, any task, any work task. And the goal is not to have that 5 minutes of work be a 5 minute long work activity. It could be just starting an email, doing 5 minutes of writing an email, or 5 minutes of work on a project. The goal is to get the ball rolling because we want to raise our dopamine level, in terms of doing a task, raising our dopamine level, letting our subconscious work on problems, and then we're just committing to 5 minutes of work. And 5 minutes of work does not feel like a whole lot, and so it allows us to get over that dopamine threshold. Now we can do this over and over again until we lock in. So that's when we get over the hump. We have enough dopamine that we've crossed the threshold, and now we're going downhill on the other side. We're locked into our work. The hard part is starting. So again, what we do is we do 15 minutes something that we love, and to do 5 minutes of work. And then after 5 minutes of work, if we're not locked in, we'll do it again, 15 minutes and then 5 minutes. And then if that doesn't work, we'll do it again, 15 minutes and then 5 minutes. It shouldn't take you more than 2 or even 3 repetitions to get going, but it can be a great way to start at the beginning of work day. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method is in many ways the most simple and most intuitive of all the methods. It's very, very simple. So it's all it is before you start a task, in your head, just count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, and then just do something. Now it sounds exceedingly simple, and in a lot of ways it is. But what it's doing is taking away all that mental clutter of like, if I do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this, and if I, but and it's like it's a bit like talking yourself into the pool. We're just once it looks cold, but we know it'll be fun once we're in there. But we just got to dive in. And once you're in, you can have a great time. But we just have to talk ourselves into it. So just going to do a task before you just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Pairing is combining a low dopamine activity with a high dopamine activity. So, for example, that would be doing the dishes, which we don't like doing, but while listening to an audiobook, which we do like. And so the audiobook is giving us enough dopamine to do the other piece. Or watching TV while we're folding laundry. So we like watching TV, but we don't like folding laundry, but the TV is giving us enough dopamine to continue our work. I find this incredibly helpful when, especially with cleaning or chores or anything like that. And I often combine it with a timer. If I know I only have a set period of time, that feels like an achievable dopamine level. So if I normally I struggle to keep my room clean or whatever it is, but if I set a timer and listen to a podcast that I'm really interested in while doing it, I I have a perfectly clean room almost all the time. Lego instructions. So this is a strategy that is fairly simple. I'm calling it Lego instructions because I think a lot about when I was a kid. I used to love putting together Legos. I loved, you get this big Star Wars Lego pack and you follow each instruction piece by piece by piece, and it becomes this incredible thing. And it was either I had the capacity to build a big thing following the instructions, um, each individually, or I would make something completely creative. Um, but in following those instructions, I was able to go by the book in an interesting way because I didn't have to hold all the different parts of the process in my mind at the same time. Uh, the way that this relates to ADHD is that if we can focus on each individual piece of the task that we're doing, focus on them individually, then we're able to lower the dopamine threshold required to get there. So, for example, if we have a big, like, let's say the task that we're struggling with is to make a recipe. If what we need to do is we're making some complicated recipe and we can't hold all these things in our head, um, then what we can do is write down each individual thing that we have to do. And if the first thing that we have to do is just turn on the oven, that's a much lower dopamine threshold. So if our perceived dopamine difficulty level for, let's say, make creme brulee is here, turning on oven is here. And if the next step is turn on oven, then heat up butter, that's about the same difficulty level. And we just do each step individually. So the way we go about this is we would just say, we would take a piece of paper and we go through the thing that we have to do and we write out each step individually. Because sitting down, we'll be able to visualize it, understand the process, and not get lost in it. And so that way, when we go do it, we can always refer back to that piece of paper and focus on just one thing at a time. So, for example, if we have to, for a work example, if we have to write a paper, instead of if write a full paper, send it off. That's a very high dopamine threshold. Open open Google Docs um, is about here. Maybe brainstorm for 2 minutes. That's also here. Um, Begin a paragraph, write for 5 minutes. It's maybe here, but it's a much lower dopamine threshold when we break down each step and focus on it individually as individual pieces. The last strategy is ceremony. So this is kind of the ultimate in habit formation and dopamine release, and it combines a lot of the things that we talked about before. It's not ceremony as in a religious thing. It's purely ceremony in that it's habitual and that it activates your subconscious. Um, so For example, if you wanted to start your work at the same time every day, and you wanted that work to trigger the same subconscious dopamine receptors. You wanted it to feel comfortable. You wanted it to feel easy. Maybe you start work at the same time every day. Um, After you make yourself a cup of hot coffee and you light a candle. So we have both all of our senses are being triggered. We have our smell being triggered. We have holding a warm cup of coffee, that's touch, and then we have taste being triggered. And all of these things are acting on our brain and firing our neurons in a way that's telling us that now is the time for work. Now is the time uh, for safety, and that's lowering the dopamine threshold. How dangerous, how scary, how hard work feels. That's raising our dopamine um, levels in terms of we like the smell. Maybe we're listening to music that we like. We're drinking something that we enjoy. We're raising our dopamine. We're feeling good. We're feeling safe, and so our perception of how difficult it's going to be is lowering. And especially if we do this over time, if it becomes our morning ceremony or something that we do often, then our dopamine threshold, because we've done it before many times, um, our dopamine threshold is going to drop drastically. And it's kind of a way to train ourselves to have a lower dopamine threshold because we're proving to ourselves that things are a lot easier than we think they might be. And so it becomes easier to start things all the time.